And I'm wondering, Deborah, do you find with Friends of the Elderly that there is a gender sort of split in terms of with men getting involved? And was it yoga, Pilates, those kinds of things, that it's harder to motivate them to get involved? I would just say we've about, I'd say 15 to 20% of our attendees today are men, so we're not doing too bad. It's high, relatively speaking. But in terms of, for example, physical
very
things,
much so. Yeah. I'm sitting with our general manager, Bernie, and we both looked at each other when you asked the question, and we were like, yep, absolutely. We know with Friends of the Elderly, there is a 70-30 split between men and women. And we understand that men look to try and socialise in a very different way to women. But how do we reach them? How do we get out there? What do we need to do? So as part of what we are doing in Friends of the Elderly, we're actually in the process of conducting a piece of research into what men want in terms of social interactions, what prevents them from reaching forward, what do we need to do to enable them to feel confident to go out into a social setting or to take part in social settings. And I suppose just looking at our own services, what we do in Friends of the Elderly, many times we see men coming into us not because they thought, oh, I really want to go to that social event. It's because they've reached out through whichever practical support that they may have had through their own maybe OT or doctor or referral services. And it's through that phone call that they will build up the confidence to come into Friends of the Elderly. And only recently, about 3 weeks ago, a man who didn't want our services went along with the phone calls, eventually came into our social services. He stopped us and he spoke to both myself and Bernie, and he told us, this has changed my life. This is totally, I am a different person. I didn't realise that you were here. I didn't realise that people were so welcoming, and I didn't realise that there needed to be a new me. So it was really, really important for us. But yes, absolutely, we do, going back to your question, there's that 70-30%. And it's not just in Ireland. It's all over, because we're part of a much larger organisation, Friends of the Elderly are. We have partners throughout the world. It's mainly women volunteering as well. But what we're trying to do is to try and reach out to older men so that they don't feel isolated. And just touching on one of the points that Dr. Looney, you mentioned, which was about hearing loss. And we have realised that there was a piece of research carried out in Bristol University, and one of the reasons that men feel lonely and isolated is because of hearing loss. Women are more confident to say, what did you actually say? Older men don't feel that they should have to say, what did you say? Because they have that feeling that they should be stronger, that they can't show a weaker side. So that was a huge part of feeling lonely and isolated. I do think that there needs to be a stronger voice within Ireland to advocate for older people, and I think that is something that we really need as a society to come together and realise that we're in an ageing population. There are more people in the world today over 60 than there are under 5, and that's the trajectory that the world, and we need to lobby our politicians, lobby what's happening in government, and to try and make those changes. I totally agree with you.
And when you think of all the various different opportunities there are for the under 5s to socialise, there's play dates everywhere. Yes. But I suppose, you know, what you're highlighting there, and what we all know to be true in our lives, irrespective of our age and stage, is the importance of social connection, the importance of developing that and maintaining that throughout our lives. And I wonder, Valerie, like in your experience, would ageism be a significant barrier to that?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest threats to the mental and physical health of the older adult. That's what I really believe. And I noticed there Dr. Declan Nine said, get your recommended health screenings. And that's lovely. But do you know that if you look at the different screenings that are available, breast check, there's no breast check after age 69, yet the risk of breast cancer increases as we get older. 43% of women diagnosed are over 70. There's no bowel screen. That ends at age 74. Yet 50% of bowel cancers were diagnosed at 70 or older. There's no cervical screening anymore. That ends at 65. Yet more than 20% of women are diagnosed with cervical cancer aged 65 or older. And there's a load of excuses if you look this up. They say that not all polyps are cancerous. So what? Mine might be. It's low risk after a certain age. Oh no, it's not. So is it that we're just not worth the cost of screening after a certain age? That is blatant ageism. And you know something? It's absolutely endemic in the health system in this country. The paternal, we know best. And that's become a byword for many areas. Now, I know there's lots of good things in the health system, but ageism is blatant. I'll tell you a very quick story. 8 years ago, I was working out on a Greek island as a volunteer with the refugees. My husband was with me. And we'd been there, it was our 4th trip. Brian had a brain seizure, and he was in a coma for 5 months. It was encephalitis. Eventually, we got him back to Ireland. And it was great, wonderful medical treatment. They gave him his life back. And then he began to get better. And nobody could quite figure out what to do with him. So 3 times, the medics tried to put him in a nursing home behind my back. They came to me with clipboards and said, sign here, I have found you a wonderful nursing home. Despite my own and the family's assertion, I said, Brian will never go into a nursing home. Even if he was still in a coma, he'd be coming home. He did wake up after 5 months, thank God. We got him home. He has a wonderful quality of life. And after that, I became very involved in helping other families who contacted me because they were in the same boat. Their spouses had serious strokes maybe, brain damage, all sorts of things. I mean, Brian has very bad brain damage, but he can still live a very good life. But I could go on at this for hours, but I know we don't have the time, so I just want to mention one family where the dad had a very bad stroke. He was treated very well in hospital, but they wouldn't let him go to rehab because he was too old. Now, this happened to my husband as well. He was 73 when he became ill. So, I mean, I nearly took Brian abroad at one stage, but it's a long story. So we got together with this family. We got this man into rehab for probably nearly a year in Donnybrook, which is quite wonderful. He didn't get his speech back, but he got most other things back. And he eventually went home, continued to recover at home. And the really good news is that a few months ago, and you're not going to believe this man passed his driving test again. Now, he was written off by the system, and that is true of so many older people in this country. You have to stand up for yourselves, and if not, you can contact Sage Advocacy, who are a wonderful organisation who will take your case on board. I did some work with them for a couple of years, and one of the things they do is they specialise in springing people from nursing homes who shouldn't be there. There's about 10,000 people in Irish nursing homes who really should not be there. They're being held there against their wishes. And they can be brought home if they're given the necessary supports. I'm not saying that nobody needs a nursing home. Of course people do. But they can be brought home, given a variety of supports, you know, district nurses, carers, Meals on Wheels, all of that. And they can be kept in their own home for years and years. And I think, you know, that is what most people want. The other thing is avoid the language that's being used. During COVID, 150 medical practitioners wrote a letter to the media complaining about the words that were being used around COVID for older people. And I have a selection of them here. Elderly, senior, pensioners, elders, OAPs, totally stereotypical, can't say the word, and again, very ageist. The other thing is people being turfed out of their jobs at 65 just because they want to. I was fired at 65 after 25 years in RTE, but I took them to the WRC and I won the case against them. It was the first case taken in Ireland on a firing because of ageism. And since then, a lot of organisations have had to take that on board, change their contracts, or make more flexible ones. So I felt that was useful. The other thing, and I will promise.
It's okay, now. You're all right.
The other thing is,
I would never get in your way, Valerie.
Sorry, we're talking about social connecting here. And the one thing we've got to remember is we have an election coming up. Now, I ran in the last election For some strange reason, I didn't get elected, but I never expected to, but it gave me a wonderful platform, because every radio station, every television programme, they had to invite me on, because they have to invite everybody. And I was on a platform for the rights of older people. So it was wonderful. I, got my say. But elections mean canvassers, and there's going to be lots of unsuspecting canvassers calling to your houses. So, make a list of the things that you're not happy about older people, about ageing and all the rest of it. I mean, I have a list of my long, and I love detaining them and making them talk about it. It's I even offer them tea. It's great fun. It's like Jehovah's Witnesses, I bring them in too. But, really harass them, annoy them. And if you get a few of the local kids around, candidates say, no, I want the candidate. And that delays them, and the candidate has to come to your house. And you tell them, write it out even, say exactly what you want. Because the existence of ageism in this country is holding back so many people. And it is wrecking certain aspects of the health services, particularly when you've got a serious illness, and you say, okay, and I knew my husband needed boot camp, he needed rehab, and it was wonderful. They taught him to walk again, but they don't like that. It doesn't suit the medical system. They'd rather get you the fair deal and stick you into a nursing home. So just take that on board. Thank you very much.
Not at all, fair play. I was conscious when you were saying about the election coming up, and when Owen was speaking about a number of different changes that are required and changes in housing, how we should all be gathering together these things as a list to bring up on the doorsteps, because I think you've more than earned the right by the time you get into your third act you've contributed to the state long enough and built the state long enough. You've more than earned the right to demand
people should
that
run
you're...
for election.
100%, 100%.
And do you realise there's so many older people over the age of 65? I've got statistics there, but I won't call them out. But if we all got together and voted, we could change the government overnight.
Yeah. Well, that's well, indeed.
That'd be great fun.
Just to bring James in here, LGBT Ireland does lots of work in terms of, say, the Champions programme, which I know you manage in healthcare settings. But just in terms of social connection in general, I know we've actually talked about it before, the additional challenges for, let's say, minority communities in terms of maintaining social connection as they age. Can you talk to us a little bit about that in the context of LGBT Ireland's work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of the solutions that were listed here, or options that were listed here today, as kind of great ways in which people may build their connections, whether that's through Active Retirement Ireland or the Country Women's Association or any of these, there are going to be barriers that will exist, not just for members of the LGBTQI plus community, because our ageing population isn't only white and Irish and English speaking. We have huge portions of our population who kind of are kept out of or haven't been considered yet when we're looking at kind of how they are going to be able to flourish and actively participate as part of late life and as part of our society. Within the LGBTQIA plus community, obviously the very particular history we have, many older members of our community, there's a higher proportion of older members of our community who are living alone, are experiencing isolation and loneliness. They don't have those sort of same familial connections that sort of people would tend to rely on. So it is a very vulnerable population. It's also people who've lived for a long time in a state where their identities were considered, or they were pathologized, they were criminalized. They didn't have the freedom to be themselves. And I think when it comes to, I suppose, the narrative, sometimes when we're coming from looking at from a mental health perspective, we sometimes lean into this notion that you are LGBT, therefore you have poor mental health. That's not the case. When you are LGBT, you have poor mental health because of how society has treated you over the time that you've been alive. You haven't had the opportunity to live with the same freedom. So if you're not married, or you don't have a long-term partner, you haven't had the ability to have children, it's not because you've made those decisions for yourself. It's because those decisions were made for you by a society that was excluding you from the time that you were very young. So now when it comes to members of our community, they're extremely anxious about about whether they're going to experience the same sort of isolation, the same sort of rejection or discrimination that they will have kind of potentially experienced in their youth or as they're growing older. So I think the advice that LGBT Ireland would have and the work that we do is about working with services to make them more kind of openly inclusive of members of our community, and hopefully that has an effect of encouraging other them to make themselves more open to sort of all other communities. One thing I would say, going back to the conversation earlier around the degree of men versus women within sort of either accessing services or within sports or social settings, I do think that the queer community could teach people an awful lot, because we, in the way, just by virtue of how we exist in our society, have to build our own community in a different way. So when you go to any of the LGBT sports or social groups that exist, whether that's the Emerald Warriors Rugby Club or the Acting Out Acting Club, it's incredibly mixed. It will be almost 50-50 men and women, and that's because, I suppose, we're a community that has to find a way to come together, and we've had to sort of lose that fear or anxiety around reaching out for help, acknowledging when we need to access something to be able to build that community, which I don't think is something that I think particularly men within our society have kind of found their way to just yet.
And it raises an interesting point in terms of your work, say, Deborah, in terms of, like, it struck me earlier when Niamh and Katie were here and talking about sort of asking for small things, like if having grips on your cutlery would be more useful, like ask for it, and all of these things which seem really straightforward, but there can be a gulf between knowing you need it and acknowledging it sufficiently enough to ask for it. And I wonder, do you find that's a challenge for people accepting where they are?
It's accepting. Yes, you acknowledge it, but it's the accepting element. And what we find, and looking at, say, the latest reports that have, we've seen today, Friends of the Elderly were in Ireland for the last 44 years. We're not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. And our ethos and mission has not changed. And it was to alleviate loneliness and isolation amongst older people. And we worked towards, and we were very cognizant of the fact that bringing social connections together did increase people's mental and physical effect. But it's raising the awareness of loneliness and that detrimental effect that it has on a person's mental and physical health. Because most people think of loneliness as just being this emotive word, but it's not. We can see these from what we've experienced today. And looking back at, say, the report from Robertson and this whole, care, change, learn. And when we look at what we've been doing in Friends of the Elderly for the last 44 years is really that in practice, because they're caring about themselves, they're leaving their homes, they're thinking about their physical appearance because they want to go out into society. And then the challenge is actually getting out the door, taking the public transport and coming into a social setting and then learning something new, whether it's from our technology clubs, or we do musical therapy as well through Drum and Strom, or whether it could be from our gardening or any of our other services. So we have actually been practicing that for the last 44 years without that name on it. So it's really important. But the most important thing is for an older person to accept that there has to be a change within their lives, and that can be very difficult. So even coming to Friends of the Elderly, where we would say that, we're there for people as well to volunteer their time, because there's just that little bit between retiring where you may have time on your hands, but yet you need that social outlet. You need to care about yourself enough to find yourself and to continue with what you're doing. And unfortunately, Friends of the Elderly, we don't get any government funding in the services that we provide. So we rely very much on the generosity of the public. Our Christmas campaign is launching this week, and we have a great ambassador, Ronnie Delaney, which many of you will know, because we have really strived to break this, this public persona of older people, as Valerie has said, and we would always refer to them as older adults, because that's who they are. It's to promote positive aging. It's to break away from that stereotype and to contribute, to show what older people have contributed to society, the society we live in, and how much they still contribute, and to raise the awareness of what you do, that we're eternally grateful.
And of course, in addition to contributing, their own right to enjoy their full potential
Absolutely.
and enjoy their lives. It's not all about
Absolutely.
giving to the rest of us and us taking, you know, it's part of just, you've, as I say, earned the right to enjoy the third
and
act of your life.
we recognise and we welcome everybody. And one of the things that we do in June is we do Pride Month, because like that, older people, for whatever reason, they never came and they never felt confident, or they felt they couldn't come out to their families. So we recognise that very much so within Friends of the Elderly.
I think you raised another point there that, I mean, I think God help anyone coming to the doorstep of anyone in this room in the next week or so. But, you know, you just highlighted there the amount of work that has been done, the gulf that is being filled by volunteers.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're
The idea that
backbone.
Friends of the Elderly is not government funded, I have
Yeah.
to say, came as a shock to me as you said it,
Yeah.
which I imagine there are plenty of other groups that also aren't. James, you were going to say something there.
I was going to say, like, one of the brilliant things over the last couple of years has been the explosion in the number of rural and regional pride events taking place. And what we have seen is that it has given a real place for older members of our community to start kind of building that sort of building those relationships within their local environment, because for such a long time the only way in which you could be gay in Ireland was by moving to Dublin. And I think that we all sort of we all as a culture, as a society, got a bit of sort of a collective amnesia around the fact that older members of our community can exist. So the fact that an older gay person is even something that exists often comes as a shock or surprise to someone. But these rural and regional pride events, there's 40 or 50 of them happening in towns and countries right across the country, are a great place now that people are actually finding that community. And it's a lovely, like, intergenerational space for people. And it's kind of going back to when you look at sort of the history of the queer community back in the sort of 50s and 60s, there was a sense of, you know, I suppose your safety depended on getting to know people who understood the lay of the land within the community, and there was a great mentoring idea between around building those relationships. Younger people would find older members of the community who'd be able to keep themselves, and bringing a bit more of that back, I think, is a great thing to learn from.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm conscious when Karen was doing her presentation, you know, the Venn diagram of change, challenge and learn, at the centre of it is social interaction. I mean, it was common through all of the presentations. And I'm wondering, Valerie, you could probably motivate me to do anything. So how would you motivate anyone in the room who's not feeling sort of confident enough to take that first step, who might know that they are maybe drifting into isolation? What would you tell them?
I mean,
Just use your mic for me there, please.
Sorry.
Or
I wouldn't
encourage them.
tell them anything, but I think I would try and build maybe on something they already have, you know. And the other thing is that a lot of grandparents now do get together at the school gate. And I think it's very important that we could include one another. I mean, I'm a terrible grandmother. I don't pick up children at all. But anyway, lots of people do, I know. And my opposite numbers in my family are wonderful. And, you know, to invite them to all the fundraisers they have and the walks and all of that kind of thing. I mean, there was a grandparents' day in one of my grandchildren's schools recently, and I had to go to it. And
You say that like it was such a chore.
it was
God
awful.
help
It
me,
really
I had to
was.
go to it.
No, it was awful, seriously. And but the kids were all, you know, doing things on computers, and we were supposed to understand them. Well, probably other people did, but I didn't. But afterwards, we had a nice cup of tea with everybody and a chat and a biscuit and all that. And then we all went over to the pub, and that was great. But, you know, I think through your grandchildren, you can make all of these links as well, which is very nice.
Yeah.
Because there's so many parents now are working, and it's the grandparents who are bringing the kids home to school, from school and that, you know.
And I think even just that principle of, as you say, building on what you already have, there'll be something in your life, and if you just sort of build it out a little bit by little bit.
Yeah.
And you can do, you know, you can take up interests. Now, I was a bit younger. I was about 59, I think. And I always had a great interest in end of life. And I went down to Cork and I did a master's degree in end of life ethics. And I wasn't even the oldest person in the class, which was actually very interesting. And it opened up a whole new avenue of interest for me. I have a friend who, when he retired at 65 from a government department, went back and did a degree in German in Trinity. And the universities, I know, are very receptive to this. You know, you don't have to have your leaving cert with 5 A's or whatever it was. You can just go in and they will assess you on an individual basis. And some of them even have grants where you can, you know, get money off your fees and all the rest of it. DCU are particularly good. They even have a section for older people, and they will do things, you know, 1-year courses, 6-month courses, and that's well worth exploring. I think they got European money for that.
Right, yeah. Now, all that remains for me to do is to just thank to thank you all for coming and for being so attentive and having so many great questions and participating in the conversation, but also to thank all of our contributors. So Niamh and Katie, who were here earlier, the occupational therapist from Connolly Hospital, Rebecca Cinnamon, who I think we all enjoyed immensely, who is here with music therapy, Karen and Declan and Owen, who are here from St. Patrick's, and Deborah, James and Valerie on the final panel.